Hey, good morning. Did you guys enjoy the extra hour? You guys look like you didn't enjoy the extra hour. No. Well, I'm excited for us to be here this morning, and I want to start out by asking you guys a question. How many of you guys can think through, just visually through your house, and you can imagine something in your house that is worthless? I'm not talking people, okay? No people. But just something in your house that you just look at and you're just like, that it's kind of meaningless. It's pointless, right? I found, how many of you guys still shop at Kmart? A couple of you guys? Okay. How many of you guys shop at the Kmart down the street from here? Yeah, that's probably not going to be there long, I'm guessing. But anyways, I'm not a marketing strategist. I wonder if Kmart will be there long because they were selling this. Can you guys see this? It is an Obama Chia Pet. Last I checked, Obama was our president, not my Chia Pet. And I'm not making a political statement here. I could care less which direction you vote this week. But as I was walking through Kmart, I could not help but notice this and wonder who would buy this. I did. So as I look at something like this, it helps me better understand some of those people that go to law school. Because I'm guessing somebody from law school thought of this while they were smoking some weed, right? And they thought, hey, I've got a great idea for a marketing campaign. Anyways, I maybe have a better understanding of some of you guys that stay up past midnight and watch those infomercials and keep those networks on the television for all of us that wonder why that's there, and it gets in the way of me going to ESPN, right guys? But maybe I better understand that after seeing Obama Chia Pet. So I look at stuff like this, and I honestly think, this is kind of meaningless. I have no use for this, and hope to return it when I'm done. If not, I have a free gift. But I look at something like this, and I promise Jeff I won't break it. I look at something like this, and I see something that has purpose, right? I won't serenade you. You don't want me to do that. But I see an object here that actually has a lot of purpose and a lot of meaning. In fact, this guitar is one of the many instruments that leads us in worship every week and has a purpose of helping us connect with the creator of the universe, right? And so as I compare the difference between what somebody from law school obviously invented, and if there's anybody from law school here, I'm not here to offend. I was in engineering school, so, right? But one has incredibly no meaning or purpose, unless you like the garden, I guess, on Obama's head. The other one has, I think, significant meaning and purpose, right? But one of the things I'm scared of as we go through this treatment series is that many of us see ourselves in this light and don't see ourselves in this light. Many of us see ourselves as a meaningless object that is cool for a while but ends up in the trash in about 6 months. And we don't see ourselves as something that has huge value and importance and meaning, and seeing God use it in incredible ways. And so you guys may be wondering, what does this have to do with treatment. What does this have to do with the series that we're currently going through? And last week we talked about loneliness. This week we're talking about something called insecurity. If you remember last week we said, loneliness, that closeness doesn't cure loneliness. That's what we said last week. Closeness doesn't cure loneliness. Well, this week we're going to talk about insecurity. And I would guess, this is a guess, that every one of us in this room, every one of us, has dealt with some level of insecurity within our lives. Is that fair to say? The rest of you guys are probably just lying. Some of you guys are putting up double hands for your neighbor. So as we go through, and we're the way we're going through this series is we're looking at a guy named Paul. And he wrote a letter in the scriptures called Philippians, and he wrote it to a group of people called the Philippians. But he wrote it in a very interesting situation. He was sitting in prison while he wrote this letter. And as we talk through today about this idea of insecurity, and as we look at what Paul has to say about that, I think Paul is a great person to speak on this issue. Let me read for you verse 18 out of chapter 1 of Philippians. Just one verse here. He says, but what does it matter? The important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached. And because of this, I rejoice, he says. Now, how does a person like Paul say, I will rejoice? Remember his circumstances, okay? Remember, he is sitting in a prison cell, and the prison cell then is not like we have today, okay? He's not watching the Ohio State Buckeyes beat up on Illinois like yesterday. If you're a college football fan, most of you guys must not be. Amen. He's not sitting in a prison cell that's comfortable. He is actually, I've been in a prison cell like where he's sitting. He's sitting in a cell that is a hole in the ground. It is cold, it is damp, it is wet, it is gross, it is nasty. He's in physical pain. He's in emotional pain. He is in probably spiritual pain. He's a hurting dude at this point, okay? He's at a point where he is probably knows this by now, that he's facing death, okay? So how does a guy like that come to a place and say, I will rejoice? So Paul is sitting in this pit, but I wonder how many of us are also sitting in a pit of insecurity. You think through, Paul's life, and I'm going to read you an excerpt here in just a minute, but Paul himself walked through a series of trial after trial after trial after trial. All right? Now, think about maybe some of the names that he had received along the way. I think of, somebody may have called him, we may have been called Fatty McFatten, right? I'm guessing that Paul maybe was called Murder McMurderton, right? He murdered a dude, several dudes, okay? I bet that never left. I bet that image was always burned in his mind. I bet Paul was told, you know what, dude, you will never amount to anything. Have you guys ever heard that before? I wonder if Paul was told, your career path is not very good, man. This idea of church planning as a career, Paul, not one of your best ideas. Paul, this idea of leaving this place of prominence, and he was a prominent teacher at the time, and he left that place of prominence to go out and reach people for Jesus. I'm guessing that they told him, hey, dude, you're really smart, but that is a horrible idea. So as Paul is sitting in this pit, how many of us are sitting in a pit of insecurity? Maybe those insecurities of, Paul, you're not married because nobody will have you. The insecurities of maybe past divorces. Maybe the insecurities of the pit of past things that people have said to you, past relationships that have gone awry, past circumstances that have really, you feel like have never been dealt with, but they affect you today. So how does a guy like Paul sit in this prison cell, as many of us are sitting in this prison cell of insecurity, and he is able to say, I will rejoice? Now, let me show you something here. If you look in 2 Corinthians 11, 16 through 31, he says, I repeat, let no one take me for a fool. But if you do, then receive me just as you would a fool, so that I may do a little boasting. Right? In this self-confident boasting, I am not talking as the Lord would, but as a fool. Since many are boasting in the way the world does, I too will boast, he says. You gladly put up with fools since you are so wise, he says. In fact, you even put up with anyone who enslaves you or exploits you or takes advantage of you or pushes himself forward or slaps you in the face. To my shame, I admit that we were too weak for that. How many of you guys can say, I have been there? He continues on. He says, what anyone else dares to boast about, I am speaking as a fool. I also dare to boast about it. He said, are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they Abraham's descendants? So am I. But he continues. He says, are they servants of Christ? I am out of my mind to talk like this. He says, I am more. I have worked much harder. I've been in prison more frequently. I have been flogged. How many of you guys hold on to those past mistakes that travel with you, just like maybe the junk drawer in your house? He says, I have worked much harder, been in prison more frequently, been flogged more severely, been exposed to death again and again and again and again. 5 times, he says, I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I've been beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I have been constantly on the move, going from here to there, not knowing anybody in the places that God is sending me. Anybody else identify in this extremely transient area? He says, I have been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my own countrymen, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false brothers, from people who continue to falsify who I am and tell me the things that are not true about my life. Anybody else identify? He says, I have labored and toiled and have often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst and have often gone without food. I have been cold and naked. Besides everything else, I face daily the pressure of my concern for all the churches. How does a guy like this, sitting in a prison cell, looking back over the scope of his life, which was obviously a train wreck at times, able to look at his life and say, I will rejoice? How does somebody come to that place? I want to tell you something. I want you to remember this. This is what we're going to talk about this morning. Before you can be right, you have to learn to see right. Write that down. Before you can be right, you have to learn to see right. When you're in a pit, everything you see is pitiful. Right? If you are in a low point of your life, you're in a lowly place, everything you look around, even in the mirror you look at, is pitiful. Or you perceive it that way, right? So how does a guy like Paul, who is in a pit, in a pitiful place, who we just read a brief synopsis of his life, where he is traveling with this junk drawer of emotions, of pain and scars, relational failings, past mistakes. How does a guy like that travel to a place where he's able to sit in a pit but see above that pit. How do you learn to see right so you can be right? The essence of insecurity is seeing things from a pitiful perspective, isn't it? The essence of insecurity is seeing things from a pitiful perspective. I want to show you something here. The way that Paul was able to see beyond that pitiful perspective, the way that Paul was able to see outside of this pit that he was sitting in and say that I will rejoice, the only way that he was able to do that was because he saw right. Okay? We need to see things from a higher altitude. Because God is up here, and God sees things completely different from up here than I do from down here, right? And if God is up here, and God is trying to help us understand who we are, and trying to help us understand who he created us to be, and help us to understand to look outside of this pit that we're stuck in, this pit of insecurity, Paul was able to see from a higher altitude. Your altitude will reflect your attitude. Your altitude will reflect your attitude. How you see yourself will reflect how you see everything else around you. You know, if you read through the scriptures, God calls up John in Revelation. He says, come up here. I want to show you what I'm about ready to do. Right? If you read in Ephesians, it says that those that love God, pursue God, love Jesus, pursue Jesus, follow him, that we are seated in the heavenly realms, that we need to see things from a higher altitude. Your altitude will affect your attitude. So if there's a difference between what God sees and what me sees, then what me sees is always wrong and what God sees is always right. Right? So how do we come to a place where we're able again to say, I will rejoice? We come to that place in our life where we see things from a higher altitude. We see things through God's eyes. We are able to look at the junk drawer that we're traveling with through life, and we're able to say, you know what, that does not define me. Will those things sometimes affect us? Absolutely. Are those things sometimes hard to walk through and wrestle through? Absolutely. But those things do not need to define us. And until we can learn to see right, we will not be right. Look what Paul continues to say here in verse 19. He says, for I know that through your prayers and the help given by the Spirit of Jesus Christ, what has happened to me will turn out for my deliverance. He is able to look at those things that have happened throughout his lifetime, and he is able to say, you know what? God is going to use those things to make me into the man or woman that he has called me to be. God is going to bring good out of those things that were meant for bad. God is going to strengthen me, to help me persevere, to help me continue to pursue those things that God is calling me forward to. He continues on in verse 20. He says, I eagerly expect and hope that I will in no way be ashamed, but will have sufficient courage so that now as always Christ will be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death. How do you get to the place where you're able to say, you know what, all of this stuff back here, all of the trials that I've had to walk through, all of the past mistakes, all of the voices that I've had speaking lies into my life, all of the things from this junk drawer, how do I move out here and able to say that God will use that for my deliverance? Because Paul is not talking about deliverance from his literal prison. He knows that he's in his last hurrah. Okay? He knows that this is all she wrote. This is the end. So he's talking about deliverance, that God is going to deliver me to who he wants me to be, that I will finish the race, as he talks about in another book. I will finish the race as God has called me to finish. I will become the man or the woman that God has called me to become. I will not believe the lies that are spoken into my life that try to stop and halt where God is intending me to go. Because Paul sees from a higher altitude. He sees things outside of that pitiful perspective. Do you think Paul had to do that day after day after day after day? Absolutely. Do you think that maybe we need to remind ourselves the truth of who God says we are day after day after day after day? Absolutely. God has called us to live much bigger than we do. God has called us to be much bigger than we are. And I think that insecurity is one of the greatest weapons of the enemy to prohibit us from becoming who God designed us all to be, called us all to be. And be able to, no matter what the circumstances, not allow those circumstances to define us. They may affect us, but not allow them to define us. Just like my kids. If my kids make a mistake, am I going to point out that mistake? Absolutely. I'd be a horrible parent if I didn't, right? I'm going to sit them down. I'm going to say, hey, let's talk for a minute. Was that a wise decision? No. Okay, why wasn't that a wise decision? They maybe can explain that to me, or maybe I have to explain it to them. Just like God is going to sit us down and say, hey, was that really that great of a decision? Probably not. But God's going to remind us that decision doesn't define us. That past mistake doesn't define us. What somebody else spoke to me that is not aligned with what God says does not define me. I have to see those things for what they are. Before you can be right, you have to learn to see right. Have you guys ever had anybody walk up to you and they just kind of come up and say, oh, hey, oh, wait a minute, you're not who I thought you were. Anybody have that happen, right? I want you to think of something. What if you look back at them and they said, oh, you're not who I thought you were, and you say, I am. Wouldn't that kind of just freak them out? Like, what? Right? God is trying to help us understand through his word that I am somebody else. I am not what others say about me. I am not the mistakes that I've made. I am not the fears that I carry and hold on to. I am what God says I am. I am somebody else. You need to realize that the difference between who you are and how you perform is huge. You know, those times when the enemy may speak into your life and may tell you that, oh, you can't do that. You know that mistake you made back here? That eliminates you from being able to do this. It's not true. You say, no, I'm somebody else. Or that fear that maybe you hold on to and you carry with you, that fear, maybe of failure. Many of us are afraid of failure. It's a huge insecurity. And you're getting ready to step into something that God wants you to step into, to lead your family, to lead people at your job, or whatever that thing that God is calling you to. And you're saying, well, I'm afraid that I just won't be able to do that. No, you're somebody else. That fear of failure doesn't define you. that past mistake doesn't define you. You know, you're getting ready to talk with God, to pray, right? And maybe this little voice says, oh, well, you're not qualified to talk with God because of what you did back here. No, this word says that we are more than able to talk with God because of what Jesus Christ has done. And so that small voice starts speaking in. You say, no, I'm somebody else. I'm somebody else. I am somebody else. We have to remind ourselves that we are not the sole combination of all this mess, but we are a combination of who God says we are. And what I'm talking about here, this idea of insecurity, we have this idea of false humility as well, where we say, well, you know, Romans 12:3, it says that we shouldn't think of ourselves more highly than we are, right? But many of us think of ourselves more lowly than what God says we are. And many of us walk through life lacking confidence. Confidence in who God said you are. Confidence in being able to say, you know what? I can do this. I can't do all this. Confidence to be able to say, you know what? Even within Awaken here, there are a lot of things that I can't do. And some of the leadership here will remind me, you should probably leave that alone. And I have to say, yeah, you're right. I'll mess that all up. Confidence, though, confident in saying, you know what? And it's not thinking more highly than yourself, but it's confident in who God said you are. False humility is just as bad as insecurity. It's the same thing. It's the same thing as pride. We have a tendency to do this comparison game, right? And we compare all kinds of things, don't we, through life? You know, we compare good sports teams to bad sports teams. We compare, you know, this was a great movie, this was a horrible movie. We compare music. We compare all kinds of things. That's not necessarily bad, but one thing that we get into the habit of doing is comparing ourselves with those around us. And we start saying, you know, I wish that I could do that. And because if I could do that, it would maybe fulfill me. I would be able to then say, oh, I will rejoice. Right? Or we say, you know, I wish that I could be a mother like that person's a mother. They seem just like a great mother. Or I wish I could be a leader like they lead. Wow, that is so cool. I wish that was me. Or I wish that, you know, maybe my wife was a little bit more like this, or my husband was a little bit more like this. And we start this comparison game. I wish my kids would just do this, like those great kids over there. We get into that comparison game, right? And what we end up doing is we compare all of our junk, right, with somebody else's highlight reel. And there's just no comparison, because you have to understand their story to understand the glory. You have to understand that there's no comparison from my junk drawer to somebody's highlight reel. And I struggle with that sometimes. We started the church just a couple years ago, and just a handful of people. And I'll look at other guys, and I've gotten to know a lot of the other pastors in the area, and I look at some of their stuff, and I sit and I talk with them, and I start, you know, thinking, man, I wish that we could just move that way just a little bit, right? I look at guys that have been at this 3 times longer. Oh, I wish that we just moved this way just a little bit. And we start that comparison game, right? But you know, something I realized just more and more as time goes on, and I pray that God is maturing me, is, you know, as I sat with one guy, he says, you know what, be careful not to lose your family. And he starts talking about how he's lost his family a little bit. And I said, wow, man, no kidding, I never knew that. Or another situation, a guy says, you know, our children's director just left because of a military move, and I'm like, wow, you know, they've been around for a long time, and wow, they go through problems like that too, right? And I start realizing, you know what, man, this dude's just as screwed up as I am. As I start understanding more of the story. Or, wow, you know what? Their church has some pretty screwed up people like our church does, right? Or, man, they have weeks where their offering sucks too. Or, wow, there's people that give blind eyes while he preaches just like me. We have to understand that I can't compare somebody's highlight reel to real life. But yet we do it all the time, don't we? We compare what I think is something incredible without knowing everything else that's a part of that, without knowing the whole story behind it. And that's where the enemy robs us of understanding who God made me to be and being confident in who God made me to be. And not carrying this whole junk drawer with me and being able to say, like Paul does there in Philippians, that, you know, all that has happened. I see this as I'm in this pit, but I see this as a deliverance. Not Deliverance the movie, but just God is delivering me, right? How many of you guys have kids? I think our kids can teach us a lot of things. I've got 4. In fact, it was funny. We went trick-or-treating the other day, and I had to have my neighbor help me corral my kids. We have a 7 and 4-year-old. Most of you guys know, and they were dressed up as Optimus Prime, and I think Riley was Tinkerbell or something. I don't understand all the princesses. There's like a million of them. Anyway, she was a green princess. So they're out trick-or-treating or whatever, and then we dressed our youngest daughter, who's 18 months, as Dora. Her favorite thing is Dora the Explorer. And it was kind of funny. We got her in her costume, and I told our neighbors, I said, she's Dora. She's a plump Dora. She's at that stage. She's got this little pot belly. You know, she was like me when I was growing up. You know, get a little pot belly, and you kind of, and you go, and so I'm kind of following her around and helping her as she's running around after the other kids getting candy. And it was awesome. My wife was holding the baby, but it was awesome walking with Kaden. And she'd walk up to one of the houses, and they would give her a piece of candy, and she would say, thank you, you know, at 18 months. And then she would turn around and walk away. And we went up to this one house, and they would say, you know, take what you want, you know, just grab one. And she literally grabbed one, said thank you, and walked away. And the guy at the house said, wow, that's amazing. She only took one. I said, yeah, I wish I could teach my 2 oldest that. You know, so it was just a lot of fun to walk with them. And I came home yesterday, and Caden's at that age, especially with the baby that just came, that she's becoming a little bit more of a daddy's girl. Any other daddies in the room, and you're just like, your heart melts, you know, maybe if you have a daughter. And she's becoming a little bit more of a daddy's girl. I walked into the house yesterday, and her face just lit up. She's like, "Ah, Daddy," and it and your kids weigh on every word you say, don't they? And they weigh on everything that you think of them. They want you to be happy with them. And I always want my kids to be able to come to me and to be able to say, my daddy thinks highly of me. My daddy believes I can do it. And it reminded me this week as I was preparing and asking God, what do you want us to say about insecurity? That as we get older, we often go to somebody other than our daddy for approval. And our daddy being God himself, who says he wants us to know him as daddy. For some of us, maybe doing our faith, or maybe just trying to understand who God is, that can sound a little bit weird. Maybe some of us that didn't have a positive daddy, that could maybe be hard to grasp. God is a perfect daddy, and he says, I want you to come to me to know who you are. Just like my kids, I want them to be able to come to me to know who they are, and that I can teach them from God's word who God says they are. But many of us go to other places to find out who we are. We go to the magazines, or we go to the bookstores, or listen to different music, or the television to find out who you are. And I'm not saying all those mediums are bad, things that you intend to use them for, but we need to remember, just as I want my kids to come to me to find out who they are, God is saying, I want you to come to me to find out who you are. And the title of this message today is, My Daddy Says I Am One. And I encourage you, because again, in order to be right, we have to learn to see right. And in order to leave all of this behind and not allow the past to define us, we have to learn to see right. We've got to get new glasses. We've got to get new bifocals. We've got to get LASIK surgery. We have to get a new mirror, a new perspective, see things from a higher altitude. We have to be able to see right to be right. And I pray that we will journey together as this world we live in teaches us all kinds of lies about who we are and who we're not. But I pray that we journey together and that we are able to say, my daddy says I am one. And if it's helpful to you, there's sometimes it's hard to navigate where different things are in the scriptures. There's back of the information table, there's some sheets of paper back there that have almost 100 different things that the Bible says you are. And we don't have time to go through all that here today, but I would encourage you to grab one of those on your way out and to say, God, would you teach me who you say I am? And help me to be able to get out of this pitiful perspective of insecurity and be able to see things the way that you want me to see things, to see things through your eyes. So I pray that that would be your goal here today, and that you would see fruit come from your life as we work through this treatment series. Lord, pray as the band comes up. Lord Jesus, thank you for who you say that we are, Lord. Lord, thank you that all of those past mistakes and failures, all of those things that we have been called, things that have been said about us, Lord, I thank you that those things aren't necessarily true, and that what is true is what you say about us. And Lord, whether we come from good history of or a bad history, or Lord, wherever we come from, we all enter in with some type of insecurity. And I can have not been able to identify anything more in my life that holds me back than insecurity. And Father, I can see that as I become more confident in who you say I am, that I am able to leave some of those things in the junk drawer. So Lord Jesus, I pray that you would help us to understand who you say we are. My daddy says I am. Help us to see things from a higher perspective, Lord, from your perspective. It's in your precious name, Jesus, amen.